Greetings and welcome. It's me, Steve, the Gaming Grandpa here, with the second part of my life in gaming. So if you watch the first part, you'll see that when I grew up in the 1970s and progressed through the 70s and 80s, you'll see the game consoles I had. So today I'm going to expand on that because the 1990s were a major improvement in games, as you'll see very shortly. So the 1990s was still very much controlled by Sega, which you'll see in a minute. Towards the end of the 1990s is when Sony and Nintendo obviously came on board with their big machines. So we have the Sony PlayStation 1, which came out in 1995, 1996. That's here in Europe. And then the Nintendo 64, which came out in 1997. Again, that I'm using Europe dates here. But let's go back to all the consoles that I had, because unfortunately I didn't have a Nintendo growing up. I stuck with Sega. Sega was for me one of the greatest consoles of all time. So where do we start with this story? Well, we start in 1990 when the Sega Mega Drive was launched in Europe. Now, it did release in Japan, I think about 18 months earlier, so it was quite late coming out in Europe. But the Sega Mega Drive looked like this. So let me show you a picture, guys. So there you go. That is the Sega Mega Drive. That's the original console when it came out. So you know, the machine took a completely kind of matte black look, or gloss black should I say. You had the 16-bit on top there, which showed you obviously its power, and it was powerful for its time. The controller, or the control pad, as you can see there, was a lot better, a lot more compact, and it just felt easier to hold than the old Sega Master System controls. It was a great console. It had obviously two control ports on the front there, and it had a massive selection of games. So Sega really did put a lot of time and effort into this console. So some of the games I will show you next. So here are some of the games for the Sega Mega Drive, and as you can see there are a vast collection, and you will notice some familiar characters here. So obviously we had the likes of Alien Storm and Altered Beast. These were great games. Castle of Illusion, Golden Axe made the jump from the Master System to the Mega Drive with improved graphics. Mortal Kombat, and of course, who can forget our favourite hedgehog Sonic. Streets of Rage again was a very popular game on the Mega Drive. Desert Strike, that was made by EA, Electronics Arts, as they were known then. They didn't shorten their name then. It was still Electronics Arts. But they had quite a few of these. I think there was Desert Strike. There was definitely Jungle Strike. I think there were maybe three of them. Echo the Dolphin, great game. Outrun, Street Fighter, and Road Rash. Road Rash, I had so much fun on. So that's some of the games. And now you can see here the cartridges. So Sega, at this point with the Mega Drive, stuck to having cartridges. We hadn't made the jump from a cartridge to a CD at this point. So it was still, everything was on a cartridge. And the cartridges just basically plugged in the top. So you see there, you've got Sonic, you've got Echo the Dolphin there, Mortal Kombat. Now you'll notice Micro Machines 2 there. Can you see that? And on the top as well, it has two extra ports. So that was so you could play 4 players on Micro Machines. So again, quite good for its time to have 4 players on one console was definitely unheard of. So yeah, so that's what the games look like. So now, shall we have a look at some gameplay? I think it's time to. So first of all, we have the classic Streets of Rage. This was a two-dimensional beat 'em up where you could have players. I think it was 3 characters, but it was such a good game. It was the graphics were so much fun. It was basically the way the characters jumped and fought was very similar to Golden Axe, but just this was set in like a modern universe. RoboCop versus the Terminator. Who would have thought RoboCop and the Terminator in the same game? But again, it was really good, and you can see the graphics were very good for RoboCop. So that was another good game. Now next we have Street Fighter. Who can forget Street Fighter? With its different combinations of moves and using your powers and firing fireballs, which I could never do, but it was a great game on the Mega Drive. Now here we have Sonic the Hedgehog. This was actually Sonic the Hedgehog number 2. And I remember this level like it was yesterday. Yeah, Sonic was a big part of Sega and the console, and basically, you know, winning people over. So there's some classic Sonic action, guys. The next game we're showing here is Road Rash. Road Rash was like a motorbike racing game with a different. So you were actually not only trying to win the race, but all along the way try to knock other riders off by kicking them or using your chain to get them. Such a fun game. Now, who can forget Earthworm Jim? What another fantastic character. Earthworm Jim needs to make a comeback, I feel. Again, a really good platform style game, and so much fun. The character animation was top notch. Now I know we've already had Sonic, but I wanted to touch on this game because this was Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic 3, and again this game introduced us to Knuckles. The beauty about this game was in a very interesting aspect. So let me just pause the game there. So yeah, so this was one of the first games where Sonic 3 was like a game in itself, but also it had the top of it was open, so you could then slot your Sonic 1 or Sonic 2 game into the top, and that would allow you to play the levels from Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 using obviously Tails and Knuckles and things like that. So it added a whole new way of playing the Sonic games. So yeah, so basically that's the Mega Drive. The Mega Drive in the UK here went for about, well, it went for at least 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit further than that. But in 1995, a new console entered the market. I will show you this new console. So the new console I am obviously talking about was the Sega Saturn. So this launched in 1995 here in the UK, the same year as the Sony PlayStation. And as a PlayStation, the Sega Saturn was exactly the same, and this started by using CDs. So Sega moved away from the cartridge. They felt that the CDs could hold more information and more data. As you can see here, we've got the controller is very, very similar to how the Sega Mega Drive controller looked and felt, except it had a few additional buttons. And again, the top of the console is very straightforward. You've got a button to release the top here. You've got the power, you've got the thing. What they also did here was obviously enabled you to have backward compatibility, which again was a big point for the Sega. So yeah, so that's the Sega Saturn, a nice console, I think you'll agree. So here are some of the games of the Sega Saturn. And again, it had a really good choice of games, especially at launch. It launched with quite a few very good titles. Mainly, the ones that stick in my mind are Daytona USA, such a great game, had a great soundtrack. Virtua Fighter 2 was also very good. And I think Sega Rally also launched on the initial day. It might have been a few months after, but it was very close to at the start. But again, you can see there you've got Virtual Racing, you've got Sega Worldwide Soccer. This was Sega's time to get in on the football market. Wipeout, and Nights into Dream was such a great game as well. So yeah, we'll look at some Sega Saturn games in progress now. So I can't start a Sega Saturn game compilation without obviously showing you our favourite Blue Hedgehog, and he was back again in a game that was called Sonic R. And this was definitely more a 3D rather from the 2D that we're used to. So quite a big change for Sonic. X-Men versus Street Fighter. Again, this was the chance to have the Marvel X-Men characters fighting Street Fighters and things like that. So it was really good fun. What we have here is X-Men Children of the Atom. This was basically Streets of Rage featuring the X-Men. Again, some really great looking characters and a great game to play. This was Nights into Dreams, and again it was a very beautiful game with an amazing soundtrack, and yes, it was so much fun to play this one. I mentioned Daytona USA, and here it is in all its glory. This was such a great racing game. Great soundtrack, great car designs, and it was so much fun to play. Okay, so obviously I've talked about two consoles already in the 1990s, both Sega, and I'm going to end it with the third Sega console. Now, unfortunately, this one did not last long, and it was such a shame because I felt it had some really good potential. I am, of course, talking about the Sega Dreamcast. This actually launched a whole year before the Sony PlayStation 2, but unfortunately, by this time, the Sony PlayStation 1 had really taken the gaming market by the scruff of its neck and was selling thousands upon thousands upon thousands of consoles. So at this point, PlayStation were winning. I liked the Dreamcast, but like I said, it literally only lasted, I think, maybe 2-3 years tops. But I'll show you the console and I'll show you a few of the games, and yeah, we'll have a look. So here is the Sega Dreamcast in all its glory. Now, as this was the first time that Sega moved away from like a very black, matte black, gloss black kind of finish, and they went white. I'm not sure why they went for a white console. I don't honestly know. Don't know. It of course had a CD, as the Saturn did. This time though, you had 4 ports along the front, so you could play 4 players, and there is a Dreamcast controller. Again, this was a lot bigger than the Sega Mega Drive or the Sega Saturn. And this one as well went to having just 4 buttons. Now you'll notice the buttons on this console, and you look. I'm looking at it now, and I'm thinking you can see where obviously the consoles of today got their influence from with the 4 buttons there, A, X, Y, B, and the different colours. Also, the Dreamcast, you can see that LCD unit. It also, you know, it displayed information about games and things like that on the controller. So very revolutionary for its time, but it just didn't take off. And like I said, at this point, Sony were well in the market and were outselling Sega very, very quickly. You've also got to remember as well at this point, in 1997, a year before this, Nintendo launched their Nintendo 64. So again, that was another major impact on Sega. But I felt it was a good console. Let's have a look at the games, guys. So here are some of the Sega Dreamcast games, and like I said, it was very much all CDs. The way the games were packaged was very similar to how the Sony PlayStation 1 games were at the time. And there were some great games, and there were some great exclusives. You've got to remember, you know, Sega still had the rights to obviously Sonic and a lot of other big names. So we had Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, House of the Dead 2 was another good game. We've also got, let's have a look what else we've got here. Virtual Tennis, Army Men, that was great. Star Wars, Pod Racer, great game. Crazy Taxi, who remembers Crazy Taxi? So again, the games were good. The games were good. Let's show you some of the game in action, shall we? I think it's time to do so. First we have Crazy Taxi, a very good Sega Dreamcast game. Again, lots of great music on this. All about getting your paying customer from one point on the map to the other. It was so much fun to play. We had Echo the Dolphin make a comeback on the Dreamcast, and you've got to say, graphically, it's such a beautiful looking game. This actually came out in 2000, so I have cheated a little bit here, guys, but I think you'll agree, a great game. Next we have Hydro Thunder. So this was basically racing with speedboats. Again, you know, a great looking game for its time. With the Sega Dreamcast, I felt, had a lot of 3D racing games, which wasn't a bad thing. Here we have Ready to Rumble Boxing. A really good and fun game. I had many nights playing this game. So this one is Sega GT, so a bit of an upgrade from Sega Rally and Sega Daytona, but again, the visuals and the graphics were very good. And again, another great racing game. Like I say, the Dreamcast seemed to excel at racing games. Now we can't talk about the Dreamcast without mentioning these games. I think it was pronounced Shenmue or Shenmue, something like that. You're probably all going to correct me, but these were great games and well ahead of their time. And then the last game to mention is obviously again Sonic Adventure. Again, this launched in 1999 and again was Sega doing Sonic, but doing it 3D again rather than 2D. You know, and everybody loved Sonic, and it was a great game for its time. And finally, I have to basically touch on the PlayStation, because towards the end of 1998/99, I did buy a PlayStation because of the amount of games you could get on the PlayStation compared to the Sega Dreamcast and Saturn at the time. So yeah, the PlayStation was obviously very good, and like you say, the games on the PlayStation were just outstanding. and there was such a big collection. Yeah, yeah, here's just a few. That wraps up my gaming life in the years 1990 to 1999. As you can see, it was mainly filled with Sega, and like I said, Sega started off the 1990s so strong with the Mega Drive. The Mega Drive was the best-selling console for many years, and it just outperformed anything. The Sega Saturn came along in the same year as the PlayStation, and by this time the PlayStation started to slowly edge ahead. Sega obviously tried to beat the rush by bringing out the Dreamcast before the Sony PlayStation 2, but it wasn't to be, and unfortunately the Dreamcast met its demise and was actually, I think, decommissioned in 2001. So the console literally only lasted about 3 years, which is such a shame because I do feel it had a lot of potential. So I hope you've enjoyed this part 2 of my gaming history and my gaming life. Obviously, in part 3, we look at the year 2000s. So we are finally in the 21st century. And obviously, one console had a massive impact on my life in the year 2000s. And that, of course, was the Xbox. So join me in the next episode where we enter the Xbox generation and see what happens. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you soon. Bye.